Hey guys, I've been talking about doing this for a while now, but I can finally do it. Been working on this for a little while, but I decided I'm gonna start doing a little Bible series, and I think it'll probably be pretty good. But we're gonna start out with the introduction to the Torah as a whole, and then this will also be an introduction to Genesis. So if you like this, I'm gonna try to do this at least once a week, maybe every 2 weeks. It just depends on what's going on for me at the time, but I am gonna try to be consistent with this as much as possible. But if you end up liking this, hit like, subscribe, whatever you want to do. But here we go. Um, this is the introduction to Torah as a whole. Disclaimers: I am Eastern Orthodox, so this will be a Bible study series, and I am going to come at it from an Eastern Orthodox perspective as best as I can. But I am going to try to make this study as approachable for everyone to learn from. So I'm going to try to do it where, if you're Eastern Orthodox, Roman Catholic, even a Calvinist, hopefully you're able to learn something from this and get something out of it, right? That's my goal here. So I'm gonna often come at this book, or every book I'm gonna do. I'm gonna try to come at it with some perspectives that come from my studies of Second Temple Judaism. It's going to be a lot of times where I'm going to be aiming to look at the book through a Second Temple Jewish and early Christian lens. And usually, I may use a Masoretic every once in a while, but usually you're going to see me going straight from like the Orthodox Study Bible. So usually I'm going to go through the Septuagint, like a Septuagint variant of the text, because it's older and the writings in the New Testament hardly use the Masoretic textual variants when they quote anything from the Old Testament or the apocryphal text, quote unquote, for that matter either. So that's what I'm going to be using usually. We'll see what happens with that, but I'm going to be using that most of the time. Anyways, what is the Pentateuch? What is the Torah? The Torah or the Pentateuch are 5 books that, from the very start of Judaism, were seen as part of being part of a unit. The Pentateuch means 5 scrolls, and this consists of the book of Genesis, the book of Exodus, the book of Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. Torah is Hebrew for teaching, to teach or to guide, or de-guide. A lot of people commonly accept it as meaning law, and this is true that it does mean law, but I'm going to go a little deeper into that. So in the Greek, Torah is often translated to nomos, which has often been in English turned into law. However, the Torah nomos teaching of the Hebrew people is much more than just laws and commandments to follow. The Torah also guides in culture and its way of life. The Torah is good in God Yahweh's teaching to humanity. Um, I like to always go with this, like, you read in Genesis and Exodus, you read that, well, that's not all just about law. You get that in Deuteronomy and like the lesser part of the last part of Exodus, right? And you get in Deuteronomy and Numbers a lot of it, but most of Genesis and Exodus with the stories in there, they're usually actually they're also Torah. So it's not, and you don't get really law out of that, right? So, a lot of it is teaching. A lot of it's still teaching you, guiding you. Um, but I just wanted to emphasize that it's not just about law. Torah is not just about law. So there you go with that. It's also about the culture, way of life. It's more than just commandments of God. So why did we get to this anyways with all this law? So for Latin speakers, the Hebrew Torah and the Greek nomos became in Latin called lex. And after the 5th century, the term lex started to shift in meaning around St. Jerome's time period to be less about culture, etc., and be more about just laws. And actually, if you go read St. Jerome's lexicons and commentaries and his the Latin Vulgate, in like, I think it's in the beginning of it, sometimes he'll explain like, well, I translated this way because we're I see the culture is focusing less on culture and more about just laws. So that's why he would put some things in the way that he did. So even Jerome in that time period, he starts to notice that there's kind of becoming a shift in the way that people view what lex means or law. So you'll see that that's what happens. And later on, like the West, this is why the West focuses on it so much, where they focus on law and order, and they'll usually focus on it in that manner, and they'll use it. You'll see it used a lot in like civil law and just the law in general as a context, right? But truthfully, the Torah, it is more than just commandments of God. It's not just commandments. It's more than that. So I just kind of wanted to bring that up. But God can teach and guide us through stories and records of how he interacted with people. Genesis and Exodus we'll find are mostly about that. So Genesis is actually the prologue to Exodus. Who wrote the Torah? Who wrote the 5 books? Moses traditionally is seen as the writer, but there's an obviously a loose definition here because we find clearly that someone else wrote the ending of Deuteronomy since it records Moses' death in it, right? If you go read it, you'll see that. So, but we do, for the most part, traditionally, we'll ascribe it to Moses because being part of Egyptian royalty, Moses would be very literate and he would have known multiple languages. He would have been taught that as a part of Egyptian royalty. And tradition is that Moses did write the original Torah. Someone else wrote with Moses and added Moses' death part, and the scribes over time edited but preserved Torah to us. And obviously, we the tradition is that he got the Torah from God up on Mount Sinai, right? So there you go with that. And Exodus, like we know that Genesis got a little bit edited but preserved, and we know this because like in places like Exodus 15 and Deuteronomy 32, it's pretty easy to tell that that's the case because when you're trying to translate those specific 2 verses or chapters, I should say, you find that they're in very, very ancient Hebrew, and it's it's ancient enough that it's hard for most of the translators to actually translate it today. It's not very easy. So someone definitely edited Genesis, and it even does tell us someone did. You'll find in spots where it says like, well, Jacob's well, this is here, and this was once called this. Well, and somebody had to have edited that, right? So who edited the Torah? While we can't be conclusive with this, I'm going to pretty consistently argue that it was Ezra, the scribe, as traditionally he is the editor of the Torah. So if I say something like about that, you'll usually hear me say Ezra is responsible for it. So, anyways, but that's it. You people can argue that, and it's fine. There's no conclusivity to it. It's just that for sakes and purposes, like for easy sakes and purposes, I'm gonna probably, if someone asked about, well, who was the editor, I'm gonna probably say Ezra. Okay. Um, but anyways, so here's a little bit of an introduction to Genesis. So Genesis is the first book of the Bible. In Hebrew, Genesis is Bereshith, and I may butcher the Hebrew, so forgive me. I may also butcher the Greek sometimes, but I'm going to try to do my best. But in Hebrew, Genesis is Bereshith, or beginning. And in Greek, the Exodus in Greek means the way or the road out. Leviticus means the Levitical scroll or Levitical book. Actually, it means scroll, but for modern purposes, we would say it's a book. Numbers is just numbers. Deuteronomy means second Torah or second law or second guidance. And I would probably say second Torah or second guidance would be the best way to put that. Bereshith in the Hebrew could best be described as meaning the beginning or at the beginning or something like the head of a river or the first day of the year. That's kind of what it means. So you're getting the beginning of the river, I guess. You're at the head of the river and you're making your way to the end of the river, right? So that's what it's saying when it's like the beginning of Torah. the prologue of Exodus. Genesis consists of 50 chapters and it's written in two pieces. So a lot of times Genesis 1 through 11 will be called primeval history. And in Genesis 12 through 50, a lot of times it'll be called ancestral history. And some scholars, lots of scholars actually, they want to separate and divide these two into primeval history and ancestral history. But it gives us some issues to do that. So you'll notice if you read chapter 11 and chapter 12, it connects, right? So whoever edited Genesis, the editor obviously purposely connected the two. And while I've got no issue calling, I don't have an issue calling it primeval or ancestral history because I'm around that stuff all the time. That's fine. But I think for, apologetics purposes, perhaps one should see it more as Genesis 1 through 11 being quote unquote chapter 1 and chapter 12 through 50 as chapter 2, so that they're distinct but they're connected. Because it, obviously we didn't have chapter and verses at first with the Bible. It was all just a big scroll, right? But the editor, when they connected it, I would think that it would probably be easier if we had done like, this is chapter 1, the ancestral history. This is chapter 2, or I'm sorry, chapter 1, primeval history, chapter 2, ancestral history. Kind of would make sense to do it that way, but anyways, I just kind of thought I'd put that out there, give you some thoughts to think about. Genesis 1 through 11 deals with 3 falls in it, and we will go through that when we get through those chapters. Genesis 12 through 50 gives us lots of God's solutions to the fall by enacting his plan through calling Abraham. So I know this is going to be what gets asked about a lot. So what about the young earth creationists? What about the age of the earth, etc., like that? We're going to have lots of questions like that, I'm sure. But the truth of the matter, and this may be controversial for some people that hear this, but I'm going to say it regardless. So the truth is that no one in the ancient world thought that Genesis was a science book. They didn't look to Genesis to answer those questions. So they weren't going like, oh, this is how water and all that was. This is how the universe was created. They weren't doing it like a science book. Genesis represents God's teaching to humanity through Moses, right? And if you go read like in Second Temple literature, you'll see that at least for the Second Temple Jews at the time and early Christians, because they really loved this book, Jubilees, it tells us that Moses was given the Genesis as a vision on Mount Sinai or in the form of visionary material. So, in other words, it's much like how you would interpret the book of Daniel, and at least that you would interpret it quite like the book of Daniel. So modernists and critics alike have tried to undermine Genesis by using it like a science book, and many evangelicals during history, they responded, I believe they responded in the wrong way by trying to prove that the Old Testament is true by going through it like it's a science book. And that's how I kind of see it. I see the Genesis as it says it in Jubilees that it's a vision. I think it's in chapter 1. It says it right there. And please go ahead and comment if you disagree or whatever. That's fine. Agree to disagree. But and I don't have anything against young earth creationists, by the way. This is how I view it. I think that the truth is that young earth creationism is a new, modern, novel way of Bible interpretation. So that's just my opinion on it. But when reading Genesis, I think we should try and approach it in a way where we try to discover what point that the author is trying to communicate with us. What is its relevance to my life? Why is God through Moses even sharing this with us, right? So I think ultimately, though, we should interpret it as a vision or visionary material given to Moses. So anyways, that's really all I've got for right now. And think my camera is going crazy here, but that is really all I've got for right now. And we're going to go through a lot more of this later. So thank you for listening, and God bless. We're going to go through Genesis 1 and go through all that pretty soon, probably within the next week or two. And that's about that. So thank you and God bless.